If, like me, you grew up reading White Dwarf in the late 90s and early 2000s, you likely know who John Blanche is, or you at least recognise his work. I have a strong memory of flicking through the pages of White Dwarf one day, and I came across this picture for the game Battlefleet Gothic. Now, at the time, I didn't play Battlefleet Gothic, and I didn't have the money to do so, but this image stayed with me. So when I was at my friendly local gaming store and I saw people playing Battlefleet Gothic on the table, I knew that this was finally my time to give it a go. Hello everybody, and welcome to Weekend Wargaming. My name is Alex, and I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint a Mars-class battlecruiser from the Imperial Navy in the style of the iconic John Blanche painting. So if that sounds good, stick with me and let's get to it. The original Battlefleet Gothic miniatures are as beautiful as they are iconic, and whilst you can still find some on the second-hand market, the price tags are quite high. Thankfully, in the modern world, this game has become a 3D printer's paradise, so I picked up this modular Warlock pattern cruiser kit from Soulforge Studios and printed the parts I needed on an Elegoo Saturn IV Ultra. All I needed to do to clean them up was remove them from the supports and pass my hobby knife lightly over any support marks that remained. Then using some CA glue, I quickly put everything together, and after mounting our ship on some 3mm brass tube, we're ready to prime. I primed the ship with AK Interactive Fine Black from a rattle can, and then over the top, sprayed fine grey, leaving black only in the deepest recesses. Our first and biggest step of the painting process is to cover almost the entire ship in Agaros Dune contrast from Citadel. This will give us our base coat, as well as leaving dark recess shades. I chose this particular colour as I think it's the closest match we'll get to that iconic John Blanche painting, whilst also making sure our recipe stays nice and friendly for batch painting. And I'll put this everywhere except the engines and the prow. Once the contrast paint is dried, grab yourself a large dry brush and load it up with a Shabti bone from Citadel. Wick away most of the paint on a piece of dry kitchen paper and you're ready to go. I recommend testing it on your hand before applying any paint to the model, so you can really control how much you're putting down. The trick here is to go fairly lightly in small circular motions until you're happy with the coverage. Next up is another dry brush with Screaming Skull, also from Citadel, and this time try to be a little lighter so the colour only falls on the most pronounced details and edges. For our reds, we're starting with my favourite Citadel paint, and that's Mephiston Red. We're going to thin this 50-50 with water and apply it to the recessed sections of the prow. Don't worry if this layer's a little thin, we're going to be adding a second coat shortly. You don't need to be particularly neat with this section, so don't worry if you spill over onto the prow accents. Just be careful not to get any on your newly painted hull. If you do though, don't worry, you can just go over that section again with the previous steps. And once we have our first coat on the prow, we can start painting some accents. Now there are no rules to this, but I'm imagining that these are running lights, and that they warn nearby ships of its presence in the void. These small areas of colour will help our ships to stand out and look a bit more interesting on the table. You can do as much or as little of this as you like. Once you've picked out your running lights, we could do one more coat on the prow and then move on to the metallics. But don't worry, we will be coming back to the prow later. For our silver sections, we'll be using gunmetal from AK Interactive's 3rd generation paint line. I've only started using these recently, and to be honest, I've absolutely fallen in love with them, so if you see them in your local hobby store, I highly recommend giving them a try. We're going to start with the engines, and you can decide how far up the sides of the ship these engines stop for you. For me, it's to the end of these grills. Next up, we're going to paint these little bits on the wings. I have no idea what they are, to be honest, so we'll do that, and then we'll move on to the barrels of these little turrets. The launch bays are next up on the list, and we're going to leave the topmost parts sand coloured just for a little bit of colour contrast. Then we'll follow these up with the barrels of the weapons batteries, and again we're going to keep the housing that lovely sand colour. Lastly, we're going to paint the prow Nova cannon before moving on to our gold and copper colours. For this, we're going to be using Retributor armour from Citadel, and we'll only be painting the prow accents. Try to be careful here and use the side of your brush to pick these details out. If you do get a little bit of overspill, don't worry, you can just come back in with your Mephiston red. You're going to want to get into the inside of these accents with the tip of your brush, and just go slowly here to stay as neat as possible. But again, if you slip up, it's easy to fix, so just enjoy the process. Our first wash is going to be Agrax Earthshade from Citadel, and we'll apply this fairly liberally all over the prow. We're going to want this to darken down our reds and to age our gold and copper colours, whilst also providing an almost black line effect where the two surfaces meet. Now we don't want the wash to pool up too much, so once we've coated the prow surfaces, we can come back in and wick away any excess with our brush. Just dry it on a piece of paper towel and gently bring the tip into your excess wash to pull out what you don't want. If you take out too much, you can just put a little bit more back in. Once you've washed the prow, you can drop a little bit of that Agrax Earthshade over those red running lights. And while we're waiting for the Agrax to dry, we can wash our silver metallics with everybody's favourite, Nuln Oil, again from Citadel. Put this all over your silver details, and then set your ship down and allow it to dry. Once our washes have dried, it's time to brighten up the prow with some nice easy glazes and highlights. First, get your Mephiston red and thin it down until it's about the consistency of milk. Again, test this on your hand to make sure you're happy with the consistency, and then colour back over the prow, leaving the outer edges of your underlayer to build up some gradients. Go over this one panel at a time, and because this paint is so thin, by the time you finish the last one, your first will be ready for another coat. After you're happy with your first highlight step, repeat the process again, but this time using Evil Sun's Scarlet, once more from Citadel. Glaze it in as another highlight, and this time slightly narrower than the last. Again, do this over a few layers, and when you're happy, hit the upward surfaces of those running lights with that same Evil Sun's glaze. Next up, get your gunmetal back out and just paint some straight lines over the upward facing surfaces of your silvers to brighten them up ever so slightly. Then make an 80-20 mix of Retributor armour and gunmetal to give some highlights to the edges of your gold and copper colours. To be honest, I only do the step on some of my fleet, and you can easily skip it to help you get more ships painted and have your fleet ready sooner. Now you can stop here if you like and just paint your flight base and stand black, but if like me you want your ships to stand out on the tabletop, you can take this one step further by adding some nice details and colour to the base itself. To do this, I quickly masked off the ship with a sandwich bag and resprayed the base with our AK Fine Black primer, but you can just as easily paint it black with a nice thin paint such as Contrast Black Legion or some thinned down Chaos Black. Now in hindsight, this next step would have been easier if I hadn't glued the base on first, but here we are. Our first step will be to take our Alga Green from the AK 3rd Gen range and water it down a little to help with the flow. We're then going to carefully run this through the grooves to our base and help build a radar type effect. As I mentioned, with the ship glued in place, this can be a little tricky to do neatly, but one of the benefits of thinning the paint down is we can easily wipe it away with our thumb. So if you get any overspill, just quickly wick it away. We're We're also going to be touching up the black later, so don't worry if some overspill dries before you can get to it, you can just paint over it. So again, just enjoy the ride. Once our green is done, take a black paint, and I recommend using Black Legion Contrast from Citadel, and using the body of our brush, clean up the black. If you're really careful here, the body of the brush will cover both sides of the channel at the same time without letting any paint flow into the groove. But as ever, if some does get in there, just wick it away with a dry brush, or wait until the paint dries and go over it again with the Alga green. In Battlefleet Gothic, we use these line of sight templates to determine the firing arc that other ships are in. On our Soulforge studio bases, we have these handy pips to help us with that, and I want to paint them like the template. So starting with our Mephiston Red from Citadel, I paint the entirety of the outer pip on each side and the outer half of the next one along. The inside of that one then gets a coating of white, again from AK's 3rd gen line, and we'll paint the middle pip entirely white. With that last step being finished, we are done. So there we are, a Mars class battlecruiser in the iconic John Blanche style. Now this was an absolute joy to paint, and as you can see around me, I've managed to paint a whole fleet. And thanks to how simple this paint job is, I actually completed more than what I need for a whole fleet, if we're being real, in a weekend and a few evenings after work. So thank you very much for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button, ding the bell, and do all that YouTube stuff. We'll be back soon with another video for you, but until then, stay safe, be good to one another, and happy wargaming.